Howdy freeze dryers, welcome back to the freeze drying community. One of the things that we set out to do with the freeze drying community is not only just do recipes for freeze dryers and showing tips and tricks, but we also like to educate the freeze drying community just on really everything freeze drying, covering all kinds of freeze drying topics, starting with the beginner's basics for freeze drying all the way up into advanced freeze drying. So before I do that, let me introduce myself if you have never watched one of my videos. I am Brian. I have run the freeze drying community and various other freeze drying YouTube channels since 2017 when I started doing freeze drying. And within that time frame, we have now done hundreds and hundreds of freeze drying videos. We've created products for the freeze dryer to streamline the entire freeze drying process. We've educated lots of freeze dryers, hopefully in the process, and we've now done thousands of batches from our freeze drying perspective, and we like to share that perspective and our experience with you. Let's get started on our first question. To freeze or not to pre-freeze? The right answer, there is no right answer. Either one is totally acceptable. Pre-freezing is always an option and a completely optional thing to do. I really like to pre-freeze as much as possible for quite a few reasons. The biggest reason being that it will save some wear and tear on your freeze dryer, because your first cycle or process that your freeze dryer is going to do is get that temperature down of the food you put in down to a certain range. And if you're pre-freezing, you're going to already skip part of that pre-freezing, because if your deep freeze can get down to like 0 degrees, your food is already 0 degrees when you put it into the freeze dryer, so now it just has to go another 20 degrees cooler or whatever you have your freeze dryer set at, and it's really just, it's skipping a big portion of that freezing cycle or portion process of the freeze drying process as a whole. We've also discovered in the recent years that pre-freezing can change the texture and the finished product of your freeze dried food as well, for the better. They will not expand as much as they would if they were just put into the freeze dryer warm or whatever. And this is a very individualized food question, so if you're looking to pre-freeze a specific type of food, I would definitely recommend getting on one of our other resources and maybe trying to figure out if that food will benefit from pre-freezing. I will tell you from my experience, almost every food will benefit more in texture and finished product from pre-freezing. It really helps with boil over. Liquids are a huge one for me. If you're doing a soup or some kind of paste type thing that you're turning into a powder later, pre-freezing is huge. I think it really helps with the overall texture on the completed product. Very high moisture foods are going to benefit this because it's going to help the freeze dryer dry them more evenly, and everything's going to be completed more at the same time. Super dense foods or thick foods are going to hold their shape better and really give you a nicer looking aesthetic. And because I think pre-freezing is so important, I want to mention some of the products that we have developed since we started freeze drying from freeze drying supplies that really help with the pre-freeze. We sell lids that will cover your trays, that will keep bacteria from entering the food. It will also keep some spillage from happening from the food. It allows you to have multiple batches of food ready to be freeze dried, so you can always have a freeze dried process happening. And those trays also allow you to stack them, so it keeps your deep freeze nice and organized. You can also use the dividers for that same thing, because once the food is frozen with the dividers in, it automatically makes a portion or a section. You can separate different types of foods if you want to. So I would highly recommend pre-freezing if you have the space, if you have the time to do it, and if you think it's something that's worthwhile for your freeze drying process. Then I would also check out freeze drying supplies and see what products we can offer you to help that whole streamline of the freeze drying process happen. I really hope that you find this Q&A series helpful if you're a new freeze dryer or if you're an advanced and experienced freeze dryer. I think this is going to be a lot of fun. This is going to be a new take on what we do on this channel, but really trying to improve the freeze drying community as a whole by educating all freeze dryers, no matter what your experience level is, In the meantime, this is the freeze drying community. My name is Brian. Thanks for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you give us a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and also check out all of our freeze drying resources. You can find those down in the description of this video. And this question, along with basically every other question we're going to address in these videos, can definitely be expanded on and probably warrant their own video on their own. If you ever need to do extra research, there's a lot of great resources. We wrote a freeze drying handbook you can check out. We also have a Facebook group that's called the Freeze Drying Community Facebook group that you can use search functions. You can ask specific questions, or you can search older threads and older topics to really expand your knowledge on these individual questions, or really any question you have in the future. Hey, are you unlocking your full potential as a freeze dryer? If you're not signed up for the freeze drying community email list, you're missing out on pro freeze drying tips and freeze dryer giveaways, the latest sales, inspirational people in the freeze drying community, as well as invaluable food storage recipes. And most important, unlocking your inner freeze drying guru. Click the first link in the description to get signed up.